Has the Earth catastrophe been confirmed? And is it time for the existential crisis to commence? We're going to talk about that in a little bit more, but first we're going to take a deep breath and we are going to see you on the other side.
The dream is on. I can't be shaken. I know I'm strong. Power awakened. I believe I'm great. I need my soul to scream out.
So for those of you who've been watching Suspicious Observers, he's got up to 20 now videos where he's talking about, is the Earth catastrophe cycle real? And in the latest one posted, number 20, you'll see that link below, there was a statement saying Earth catastrophe confirmed. And I don't know about you, but there's been an evolution of this process about this idea coming into being, into the awareness and acceptance, where it's a really big idea, right? So there's a part of you that's struggling, is this true? And then there's this other part of you that says, or at least of me, what if it is true? And I wanted to break that down just a little bit here with you today, because this is a really big idea. And it's one of those ideas that if it was true, this is the kind of thing that governments would keep under wraps to the best of their ability, because it isn't just you or have a terminal diagnosis. When it starts to affect everybody, things will really change. So when we hear scientists talking about these great big ideas, as they're starting to drift into, well, this just might be real, that's a very different state of mind than the abstraction of the idea itself. And so I really feel like this is an important thing to talk about, because what I noticed, and I don't know if this is true for you or not, but throughout our known history, we've always heard talk of catastrophe. I think what's really different about this moment in time is the way it's entering our collective psyche. It's not just a random crazy person. It's not just a religious sect. This is really coming into our awareness through the edge of science, from a very scientific and practical examination of geological data, astronomical data. A lot of data is going into pulling these ideas out and saying, you know what, there seems to be something very consistent happening here, and it's much bigger and scarier than anything any of us really want to know is true. And so if that idea is true, is actually less important than the fact that it's starting to enter our psyche, our awareness, our cultural narrative is starting to incorporate these ideas of doomsday and apocalypse. And we can see it in every form. We can see it in our media, we can see it in our history, we can see it in our politics. This idea is entering our mind, and it's going to start creating profound differences in our world. So we are collectively going to be at the experience of this idea if it really does take hold and start to spread like wildfire. So I wanted to do a brief introduction to how this idea actually affects the human mind, and bearing in mind that there's very specific cultural differences and age range differences and all kinds of other differences in how we process information. So this is kind of a general overview, and it won't be true for everybody, but it's a good place to start. And one of the things I've talked about in the past is this idea of letting go and different stages. And I got some feedback saying, oh, you're just talking about the stages of grief. Well, I didn't know this, but when I learned about the stages of grief, there were 5. Apparently now there are 7. So I am not talking about a system of grieving, which we do apply when we talk about the stages of grief. Is that this is very different because it's bigger than a normal experience, and it's something there's no frame of reference for. And I'm going to make it super simple. There's 2 things that are going to happen. There's the people who are going to stay conscious through this process, and there's people who are going to disassociate from this process. And so there's really only two ways to deal with this piece of information. And in many ways, we'll all have both experiences going on. And so first I want to talk about what do I mean when I say disassociate from this idea. And we call it disassociation, but I'm going to say this is what it looks like in real life. It means you get distracted. It means you forget. It means you deny. It means you make fun of it. It means you criticize. It means you get caught up in a tiny detail versus missing the bigger picture, forest for the trees. It means you may not even remember it watching this video. It may mean that you have a totally different crisis that attracts all your attention, and this idea goes on the back burner. There's rationalization as a way to dissociate. This doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't want to pay attention because it's not relevant to my personal and immediate experience. And I can go on and on and on, but the essence of when I talk about disassociations means this idea is too big. I can't handle it. So I'm either going to take one tiny piece or I'm going to try to push it away. And there may be a day where you're ready to bring that back. But we see that most in our families when we're really excited about an idea and the person we love most isn't. So it's a really common experience to have very different interpretations of what we label as fact. And one of the things I say repeatedly, I think that very few people can hear, is that most humans operate under the assumption that everybody else thinks and feels and believes the same way they do. They don't understand whether it's you or it's not you. Most people don't understand that any other point of view isn't the same as theirs. And I will go so far as to say there is no mind, whether it's human or bigger, that has the exact interpretation of information, belief, fact, all that comes together in a very unique perspective that is just yours, which makes these kinds of conversations really difficult because we're all having a radically different experience and almost nobody's aware that that's happening. So this idea of disassociating from this great big idea is going to feel even more real because it's such a big idea. A lot of us are going to have very radically different interpretations and reactions to that idea. So that's one humongous pile. And so let's talk about this other tinier group over here. And what do I mean about this idea of staying conscious through the process? And that doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It doesn't mean you don't forget. It doesn't mean that you have a lot of feelings about, is this real? Is it not real? What am I going to do? Oh my gosh. I mean, you go all over the map. But the difference is you don't get stuck. You have a lot of agility within those feelings and you allow yourself to be part of that process. So the more agile you are in your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, the better able you'll be able to handle a big idea like this mentally and emotionally. The more rigid and fearful you are about a great big idea, the more difficult you'll have. And that looks like this disassociation where you don't want to talk about it, you want to make people wrong, you want to make fun of them. You want to do anything you can to take your attention off the reality that this could be a really big deal and it might affect everybody in my lifetime. So the next thing to me that's really interesting about this idea is that it is a macro idea for a micro experience every single one of us has. Everybody has a finite physical life. And so there's really no difference to the idea that this earth has a finite physical experience in which there's a lot of profound changes. It doesn't mean life on earth ends, but almost everybody who's alive might have a radical transition off the planet, which is a very normal thing individually. So when we're looking at this great big idea, it's hard to remember that we're all experiencing the micro level. This is just an opportunity to take those same ideas and lessons and apply them at a macro level. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is what this really means and how we can use this idea of what kind of lessons and what kind of growth can I get in this kind of experience. And for anybody who's lost somebody they've loved or they've had a terminal diagnosis, you get that there's this radical shift in your perception about what's important and what's valuable in your life and your experience. And if you have a timeline, what would you do if you had 1 day left, if you had 10 days left, if you had 10 years left? there is a huge shift in how we would prioritize, what we value, what questions we would ask, how we would invest our time, our money, our energy. And that's really what this moment offers. If you stop thinking about your single life as a physical one, and we start looking at ourselves as soul and having many lives over eternity, this is an incredibly rare opportunity in which we get to examine what it would mean to have a lot of people go out at the same time, and what's going to happen to those of us who are here in that process. What I perceive as the bigger issue is not the event itself. It's as this idea moves into people's consciousness and it becomes more pervasive. You're going to see all kinds of acting out and people going crazy as they disassociate from the reality, and they start acting in ways that will be very counterproductive to society as a whole. So after watching that video, I just had some thoughts I wanted to get out and start moving this conversation forward, maybe in a more productive way, because the idea, if you just leave it alone, it doesn't really do anything. The second part of that is, okay, if this is true, what's next? And that's really what we're talking about here over on this channel. So we're going to take a deep breath. We're going to keep our fingers crossed. It's no time soon. And with that, we'll see you next time.